Before we dive in, if you love epic tales of war, strategy, hit that subscribe and like button, turn on notifications, and join our growing legion of warriors. Now, let's begin. The jungle was alive with the hum of unseen creatures, the thick canopy above casting jagged shadows on the forest floor. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of alien foliage and the distant sound of running water. Sergeant Danny Carter crouched beside the smoldering wreckage, gripping his pulse rifle as he scanned the perimeter. His dropship had gone down hard. Ion interference had fried the navigation, leaving him stranded on an unknown world. He exhaled, wiping the sweat from his brow. First rule of survival: assess your surroundings. Something moved in the wreckage, not human. Danny tensed, leveling his weapon as a low, pained whimper reached his ears. Slowly, cautiously, he approached. Pushing aside a twisted panel of metal, he froze. Curled against the wreckage was a young alien girl, her slender form wrapped in what looked like a torn survival suit. Her skin was a shimmering shade of violet, almost translucent in the dim light. She had 4 fingers on each hand, delicate yet trembling with pain, and her large, glassy black eyes locked onto him with a mix of fear and defiance. Danny's instincts screamed at him, potential hostile. But the rational part of his mind reminded him, not every alien is an enemy. She tried to move, but a sharp cry of pain escaped her lips. Danny's gaze snapped to her arm, dislocated, maybe even broken. "You're hurt," he muttered, lowering his weapon slightly. The girl flinched but didn't retreat. She knew she was vulnerable. Danny sighed. Damn it. He wasn't a medic, but he'd patched up enough broken bones in his time. Kneeling beside her, he gestured toward her arm. "I can fix this. It'll hurt, but you'll be able to move again." Her eyes widened, and she pulled back. What? How?" Her voice was soft, musical, but edged with panic. Danny raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "I just need to pop it back into place." The alien girl recoiled as if he'd suggested something obscene. "That's barbaric!" she hissed, her voice rising an octave. "You would manually reset a bone with your hands?" Danny smirked. "That's how we do things where I'm from." She shook her head furiously, her antennae twitching in distress. "You can't just force bones back into place. That's primitive." "What kind of savage are you?" Danny chuckled. "The kind that survives." Before she could protest, he reached forward, grabbed her arm, and in one swift motion, snap! A sharp pop echoed through the jungle as he reset the bone. The alien girl let out a high-pitched screech, her entire body tensing. For a second, Danny thought she was about to claw his face off. Then, silence. She blinked, looking down at her arm. Tentatively, she flexed her fingers. The pain had dulled. The joint was back in place. Danny grinned. "See? Good as new." The girl gaped at him, still too stunned to speak. Finally, she whispered, That should have taken hours of bone restructuring gel. How did you?" Danny shrugged. "Human. Biology. We're built tough." She stared at him, something shifting in her expression. Curiosity, wariness, maybe even a little respect. Then the jungle rustled behind them. Danny's smile faded. They weren't alone. The rustling grew louder, coming from the dense underbrush behind them. Danny's instincts flared, his body tensing as he reached for his rifle. The alien girl, still clutching her newly reset arm, whipped her head toward the sound, her antennae twitching in alarm. "Stay quiet," Danny murmured, raising a hand to signal caution. The girl gave him a sharp look, but obeyed, her breathing shallow. The jungle around them fell into an eerie silence, the kind that signaled something dangerous was near. Danny's grip tightened on his weapon as shadows moved between the trees. Then, from the darkness, a pair of glowing yellow eyes blinked into existence, followed by another, and another. Predators. Danny barely had time to register the shapes before they struck. A blur of black fur and muscle lunged from the foliage, razor-sharp fangs glinting in the dim light. Danny rolled to the side just as the beast crashed into the wreckage, its claws screeching against the metal. He landed in a crouch, rifle up, and fired. A searing bolt of plasma tore through the creature's flank, sending it howling in pain. But there were more. 3, maybe 4 of them, circling like wolves. Danny risked a glance at the alien girl. She was frozen in place, her shimmering violet skin paler than before. She had no weapon. "Move!" he barked, shoving her toward the wreckage for cover. But the creatures were fast. One of them leaped at her, its massive jaws snapping shut inches from her face. She screamed, scrambling backward as the beast lunged again, only for Danny to plant his boot into its ribcage and fire a shot point-blank into its skull. One down, another charged. Danny turned, but it was too close. The predator swiped at him, claws raking across his shoulder. He gritted his teeth against the pain and swung the butt of his rifle into its snout, knocking it back. That moment of distraction almost cost him. The third one pounced, but before it could tear into Danny, a sharp metallic snap cut through the air. The creature shrieked and stumbled. Something coiled tightly around its throat. Danny blinked. The alien girl had done something. She was crouched low, her previously injured arm now glowing faintly as a thin, whip-like appendage extended from her wrist, wrapped around the beast's neck. With a flick of her wrist, the coil tightened, and with a sickening crunch, the creature went limp. Danny whistled. Not bad. She didn't acknowledge the compliment, instead panting as she retracted the strange appendage back into her arm. "We need to get out of here, now," Danny agreed. The jungle had gone silent again, but that didn't mean it was safe. He pointed toward the wreckage. "Supplies first, then we find shelter." The alien girl hesitated. "You're helping me?" Danny slung his rifle over his shoulder. "Yeah, well, you'd be dead without me. And I don't leave people behind." She stared at him for a long moment, then finally nodded. "My name is Enla," she said, her voice softer now. "Danny," he replied. "Now let's move before those things come back for round 2. Together, they stepped over the bodies and disappeared into the jungle. The jungle stretched endlessly around them. A maze of thick vines, towering trees, and the strange chirping of unseen creatures. The deeper they went, the thicker the atmosphere became. The air was thick with moisture and the scent of alien flora, while the hum of distant predators reminded them they were still being hunted. Danny kept his rifle at the ready, eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. He wasn't used to this, being on the defensive. As a Marine, he'd always been in control, but this was different. The rules were changing, and fast. Enla, for her part, kept close but didn't seem to need much protection. Despite her earlier fear, she moved with a grace and confidence that suggested she was no stranger to the wilderness. Danny couldn't help but notice how fluidly she navigated through the thick underbrush, her alien physiology seemingly built for the environment. They pressed deeper into the jungle. Danny's mind raced. What the hell was she doing here? And more importantly, what did she want from him? He glanced over at her. "You said you're from here, right? What's this planet called?" Enla glanced at him, her dark eyes narrowing. "This is my home. I call it Zorthan." "Zorthan," Danny repeated, testing the sound of it. "Never heard of it." Enla didn't respond, her attention focused ahead. She stopped suddenly, her antennae twitching. "What is it?" Danny asked, instinctively reaching for his rifle. "Something's off," she said quietly, eyes scanning the tree line. Danny froze, his hand on the weapon's grip. Something was wrong. He felt it too. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. The air had grown still, and the jungle sounds had faded. Even the predators seemed to have fallen silent. Enla took a step back, her violet skin almost blending into the shadows. "We need to keep moving. They're watching us." "Who?" Danny whispered. Before she could respond, the jungle erupted into motion. A figure darted from the trees, sleek and fast, its form blending with the shadows. It was humanoid, but with angular, almost insect-like features, long limbs, sharp joints, and glowing green eyes. The creature was huge, towering at least 7 feet tall, its body covered in dark, iridescent plating. Enla gasped, stepping back. "What is that?" Danny demanded, raising his rifle. "An Ichthar," she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. "A hunter." The Ichthar didn't hesitate. It lunged, faster than Danny could react. But Enla was quicker. With a flick of her arm, She unleashed a burst of energy from her hand, striking the creature in the chest. The Ichthar staggered, roaring in fury, but didn't fall. It was built. Like a tank, tough, relentless. "Get back!" Enla shouted, pushing Danny behind her. Danny hesitated for a split second, but then obeyed. He knew he couldn't outgun this thing, not with a single rifle. The Ichthar advanced, swinging its claws with terrifying precision. It caught Enla's arm, slashing through her suit and drawing blood. She cried out, but the wound healed almost. Instantly, her body glowing faintly. Not just alien, she was something else entirely. Danny's mind raced. What the hell was she? The Ichthar was relentless. It came again, but this time, Enla wasn't retreating. With a defiant cry, she lunged forward, her arm extended toward the creature's neck. Danny watched, his breath held, as she connected, and in an instant, her whip-like appendage wrapped around its throat. The Ichthar howled, thrashing in a desperate attempt to escape, but Enla's strength was monstrous. With a twist of her arm, she snapped its neck, the beast falling to the ground with a heavy thud. Danny stared at her, awe mixed with disbelief. "What the hell are you?" Enla turned toward him, her face expressionless but for the hint of exhaustion. "I'm not from this world, Danny, but I'm not entirely alien either." He wanted to ask more, to understand what she was, but before he could, the jungle exploded with movement again. "Get ready," Enla said grimly, as she readied herself for whatever came next. The jungle erupted into chaos as more figures appeared from the shadows. At least a dozen of the Ichthar, each larger and more imposing than the last, emerged from the trees, their glowing eyes fixated on Danny and Enla. The hum of their energy weapons, a soft buzzing in the air, signaled their readiness for combat. Danny's heart raced, the pulse of adrenaline surging through his veins. He was outnumbered, badly. His mind flashed back to his training, but even the best tactics couldn't change the fact that these enemies weren't human. They were something else entirely, and their technology was far beyond anything he'd ever seen. He glanced at Enla, who was already preparing for the inevitable. Her arm was glowing again, the same energy crackling around her like an invisible shield. She met his eyes, her expression calm, but Danny could see the strain beneath it. She wasn't just holding her own, she was pushing herself. "I'll draw them in," Enla said, her voice steady despite the growing number of Ichthar. "You take them out." Danny wanted to argue, to protest that he didn't know the terrain, that he didn't know the full extent of her powers. But there wasn't time. "Got it," he said, pulling his rifle tight to his chest. "Let's make it count." With a deep breath, Enla sprinted forward, her movements a blur as she dodged the first wave of Ichthar claws. She released another blast of energy, this one more intense, sending two of the monsters staggering back, but there were too many to fight head-on. Danny dropped to one knee, lining up his shot, but before he could squeeze the trigger, the Ichthar charged. They were fast, their long limbs covering the distance between them in seconds. Enla was in the thick of them now, her glowing arms slashing through the air as she disabled the first wave. She was impressive, but Danny knew she couldn't hold out forever. She was still wounded from the earlier fight, and these creatures were relentless. The ground beneath Danny shook as another wave of Ichthar surged forward, this time in a formation that seemed too organized, too tactical. They were adapting, learning how to counter Enla's powers. Without thinking, Danny dove into the fray. He fired rapidly, his shots taking down two of the monsters, but it wasn't enough. They were closing in. One of the Ichthar lunged at him, its claws outstretched. Danny barely rolled out of the way in time, his heart pounding in his chest. He grabbed a nearby branch, swinging it at the creature's face. The Ichthar staggered back, but another one was already on him. Danny's rifle was out of ammo. He had to improvise. Enla was fighting like a force of nature, but even she couldn't cover every angle. She shouted something, but the words were lost in the noise. Danny grabbed a jagged rock, hefting it in both hands as the next Ichthar charged him. He swung with everything he had, smashing the creature in the jaw with a sickening crack. The Ichthar stumbled, but it was still coming. He dodged its claws, shoving it aside, just in time for another wave of energy blasts to hit. Enla, she wasn't giving up. Her body was glowing brighter now, a faint aura of energy surrounding her as she took down Ichthar after Ichthar, her appendages extending in ways Danny could barely comprehend. The air was thick with the crackling of her power, and for a moment, it felt like the world had gone still. But the Ichthar kept coming, more and more of them. They were relentless, like an unstoppable tide. Danny turned to Enla, his voice hoarse. "We need to get out of here. This is too much." She nodded, her face set in determination. "We fight, we fall back, no choice." He met her eyes, his chest tight with the realization that they were on the edge. If they didn't find a way out of this, they were dead. Enla's energy flared again, more powerful than before. She extended both arms, releasing a massive shockwave. That threw the Ichthar back. Danny's ears rang from the force of it, but he didn't hesitate. This was their chance. "Now!" Enla shouted, her voice crackling with authority. Danny sprinted, side by side with her, as the last of the Ichthar regrouped. Behind them, the creatures roared in frustration, but they didn't follow. For now. The jungle opened up ahead, revealing a narrow path that led deeper into the unknown. "We move fast," Enla said, her voice a low growl. "We can't stay here." Danny didn't argue. They weren't safe yet. They ran, faster than they had ever run before. Danny's legs burned, his lungs screamed for air, but they didn't stop. The path ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, winding through the dense jungle, and yet the sound of the Ichthar, those unrelenting hunters, echoed in their wake. Each step felt like they were escaping death by mere inches. Enla was ahead, her glowing form cutting through the darkness like a beacon. She moved with a strange fluidity, a grace that Danny couldn't fully understand. He had to hand it to her. She wasn't just strong, she was an expert in survival. She had survived here for who knew how long, and that gave her an edge he could barely comprehend. But even Enla couldn't outrun the jungle forever. They needed cover, and fast. "We're close," she panted, her voice strained, but steady. "Close. To what?" Danny asked, glancing over his shoulder. The jungle seemed to close in on them, dark shadows moving, distant calls of predators waiting for an opening. Enla didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flicked to the trees around them as though searching for something. She turned a sharp corner, vanishing into the thick underbrush, and Danny followed without hesitation. Then, as if by magic, the jungle opened up. What appeared to be a wall of dense foliage suddenly revealed itself to be a hidden gateway, a massive vine-covered stone archway, half buried in the earth. Enla stopped, her eyes flickering with recognition. "This is it," she said quietly. "The last sanctuary." Danny looked around, trying to take it all in. The entrance was ancient, overgrown and forgotten, but the architecture was undeniable. This wasn't a random structure. Enla's glowing hand reached out and pressed against the stone. There was a low hum, followed by a sudden shift in the air, and the vines pulled back, revealing an entrance. The hidden city was beyond. "What is this place?" Danny asked, his voice tinged with awe and suspicion. "Home," Enla replied. "My people built this city before everything fell apart." Before Danny could ask what she meant, they were inside. The entrance closed silently behind them, leaving the oppressive jungle behind. They were in a vast underground city, one that looked ancient yet strangely advanced. The walls were made of a smooth, almost metallic material, gleaming softly in the low light. There were strange markings on the walls, symbols Danny didn't recognize, and the air had a strange, sterile quality to it, unlike anything he'd ever breathed before. "How old is this place?" Danny asked, his eyes scanning the environment. "Thousands of years," Enla said, her voice distant. "It was abandoned long before my people came to this planet. And now, it's all that's left of us." The truth hung heavy in the air. Enla's people, they were gone. They walked deeper into the city, and Danny's mind raced. What had happened here? What could have wiped out an entire civilization, leaving only a few scattered survivors? They reached what seemed like the central hub of the city, a massive chamber, its ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. At the center, a glowing orb floated silently, casting an eerie blue light across the room. "That's the core," Enla said, her voice trembling with a strange mix of reverence and sorrow. "It powers everything. The city, the defenses, The technology. Danny approached cautiously, feeling the pull of the orb. There was something almost alive about it, something that hummed with an energy that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "Why are we here?" Danny asked. Enla hesitated, then spoke softly. "I came to find this place, but I didn't expect to find you, Danny. There's something I need you to understand." Danny turned to her, his heart beating faster. "What is it?" "This city isn't just a refuge," Enla continued, her voice serious. "It's a weapon, and I need your help to activate it." Danny blinked, confused. "Activate it? What for?" Enla's eyes hardened. "The Ikthar. They're not the only threat. Something far worse is coming. We have to stop it before it destroys everything." The weight of her words settled over him like a heavy cloud. He'd been caught up in this mess, but he hadn't fully realized what he was involved in. Now, with a hidden city, ancient technology, and a looming enemy, he was in deeper than he could have ever imagined. "I didn't come here to fight a war," Danny muttered, his voice heavy with uncertainty. Enla's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Neither did I." But the truth was undeniable. They were about to be caught in something much bigger than a fight, for survival. They were about to face the beginning of the end. The chamber hummed with a quiet, rhythmic pulse as Enla approached the glowing orb at the center of the room. Danny stood a few paces behind her, still processing everything. His mind was racing. "Activate a weapon," she'd said. He had no idea what she was talking about, but he could sense the urgency in her every movement. This wasn't just some alien city. It was the last bastion of a forgotten people, a civilization long gone, and whatever she was about to do, it could change everything. Enla reached out, her fingertips brushing the surface of the orb. The room seemed to hold its breath. The energy in the air thickened, the hum turning to a steady, deep vibration that reverberated through Danny's chest. "It's activating," Enla whispered, her voice laced with awe and something darker, fear, perhaps. "The core needs a catalyst, a human one." Danny frowned. "What are you talking about? A human catalyst?" Enla's eyes flicked to him, a shadow of guilt crossing her face. "The city was designed to be powered by a biological connection. When my people abandoned this place, they shut it down. But there's a failsafe. A human being, you, can connect with the core and bring it back online." Danny felt the weight of her words sink in. "And if I do that? It will awaken the weapons, the defenses, the power," Enla said. "But not just that. You'll be linked to the core. Your life force will be tied to it." A chill ran down Danny's spine. He didn't like the sound of that. "Tied to it how?" Enla hesitated, then spoke quietly. "If you do this, you'll become its protector. The city's power will be at your command. But it will also take a toll on you. Over time, it will drain you, your life, your strength." Danny's pulse quickened. He was a soldier, not some sacrificial pawn. "What are you asking me to do?" Enla turned back to the orb, her eyes softening. "I'm not asking you to die, Danny, but the choice is yours. This city is the only thing that can stop the Ikthar from overrunning this planet. It's the only thing that can keep them from reaching the core of the galaxy." Danny felt the gravity of her words. The Ikthar. Those damn creatures. And the danger of whatever force they were trying to unleash. He couldn't just walk away. Not when lives were on the line. Not when his life might be the only thing that could stop this madness. But even so, the thought of linking himself to a glowing alien orb, of losing his humanity piece by piece, made him uneasy. He wasn't sure he could even trust Enla fully. She had her own agenda, one that was still a mystery to him. "What happens if I don't do this?" he asked, voice tight. "The Ikthar will come," Enla said simply. "They'll find the city and use it to destroy the last of my people. They'll use its power to enslave this world, and then they'll move on to the rest of the galaxy." Danny's mind raced. Could he live with the consequences of doing nothing? Would he condemn everyone? His own people? Enla's people? To death just because he was afraid? Enla seemed to read his thoughts. She stepped closer, her voice low. I know it's a lot to ask, but we don't have much time. The Ikthar are already on their way. The urgency in her tone cut through the fog of doubt in Danny's mind. He didn't know what the hell he was doing, but he knew one thing for sure. The stakes were higher than anything he'd ever faced in his career. Danny took a deep breath, his decision weighing heavily on him. He walked toward the orb, his feet feeling like lead. His hand hovered over it, uncertainty still clouding his mind. You ready? Enla asked, her eyes never leaving his face. Danny met her gaze. Let's do it. With a deep breath, he placed his palm flat against the orb. The moment he made contact, a sharp, searing pain shot through his entire body. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought he might pass out. The energy surged into him, filling every fiber of his being, like electricity coursing through his veins. It was painful, overwhelming, and yet there was something intoxicating about it. He could feel the city awakening around him, the walls, the very ground beneath his feet, all alive with power. The core was alive, and so was he. Then, as quickly as it had started, the pain ceased. Danny stood there, his hand still on the orb, his heart racing. His body felt different. You're connected, Enla said softly. You can feel it, can't you? Danny nodded, but the words stuck in his throat. It was like something deep inside him had shifted. He wasn't just human anymore. He could feel the city's power, its history, its energy. It was all inside him now, but he wasn't sure how long he could hold on. I'm ready, he said, his voice hoarse. Let's stop them. And just like that, the city came to life. The air was thick with energy as Danny's senses flooded with the raw power of the city. He could feel every pulse of the core, every beat of the hidden weapon systems coming to life deep within the heart of the structure. It was a power he had never dreamed of, raw, primal, and terrifyingly vast. Yet, with that power, he knew his time was limited. His connection to the core was already draining him, but there was no turning back now. Enla watched him carefully, her eyes sharp and calculating. You'll need to focus, Danny. The Ikthar won't hesitate. They'll strike fast and they'll hit hard. Danny nodded, his body still buzzing with the aftershock of the core's awakening. His vision had adjusted, and now, with every pulse, he could see the city in a way he never could before. Hidden defense systems hummed beneath the surface, ready to strike. Weapons platforms powered up in the distant tunnels, and large doors slowly began to open. They were ready. How do we fight them? Danny asked, his voice steady, despite the overwhelming sensation coursing through him. We don't, Enla replied with a grim smile. The city fights for us now. A rumble echoed through the chamber, followed by the shriek of something alien and far too close. Danny's heart raced. The Ikthar had found them. Get ready, Enla said, already moving toward a nearby console embedded in the wall. Her hands flew over the alien controls, pulling up holographic projections of the approaching forces. Hundreds of Ikthar ships were closing in, their sleek, menacing forms cutting through the sky. They're coming in fast, she muttered. But we've got a surprise waiting for them. Danny gripped the hilt of his pulse rifle, feeling the weight of the weapon for the first time in what felt like days. The Ikthar wouldn't stand a chance against the city's full force. He knew that, but still, something gnawed at him. Enla turned toward him, her face hardening. Stay close. We need to activate the defense grid. If we do this right, the city will lock down, and the Ikthar won't get a single inch inside. Danny followed her without question, his eyes scanning the sky. In the distance, he could see the glint of the alien ships closing in fast. The battle was about to begin. You think the city can hold them off? Danny asked, his voice tense. Enla hesitated for just a moment, her eyes narrowing. I hope so. But if they breach the city... Her words trailed off as a blinding flash of light split the sky. An Ikthar ship had broken through the atmosphere and was hurtling toward them. It was massive, its hull gleaming darkly against the stars, and it was closing in fast. We don't have much time, Danny shouted, his pulse quickening. Do we have a plan? Ainla's expression darkened. We do now. In one fluid motion, she pulled a small device from her belt, activated it, and placed it into the console's core. The ground beneath them trembled. The city's defense grid flared to life. Danny could feel it. The pulse of the city's power surging to the surface, unleashing a wave of energy that rippled outward. The walls shook. The sky above rippled with color as the first wave of Icthar. Ships barreled toward them, and then, the city struck. Hundreds of beams of pure energy shot from hidden turrets embedded deep within the walls, piercing the air with a sharp hum. They hit the Icthar ships with devastating precision, ripping through their hulls with a force so powerful that entire ships disintegrated before they could even fire a shot. Danny stood frozen for a moment, in awe of the sheer might of the city. This wasn't a battle, it was an execution. But the Icthar weren't finished. From the largest ship, a dozen smaller, faster vessels detached, darting toward the city's defenses. The attack wasn't over. "They're sending in ground forces," Enla said, her voice a sharp command. "Get to the surface. We need to stop them before they breach the perimeter." Danny didn't hesitate. He was already moving, adrenaline flooding his system. He and Enla raced toward the surface elevators, the rumble of explosions and gunfire filling the air as they ascended. The city had turned into a fortress, but even a fortress had its weaknesses, and the Icthar had found them. When the elevator doors opened, Danny stepped into the vast open courtyard of the city. The sky was painted with streaks of laser fire as the remaining Icthar ships made their final assault. On the ground, the enemy soldiers were disembarking, alien creatures covered in sleek armor, their weapons charging with deadly energy. "We can't let them in!" Danny shouted, his rifle already at the ready. Enla raised her arm, and the city responded. Massive walls of energy shot up around them, but they were only temporary. The Icthar forces were relentless. They would find a way through. "Time to finish this," Enla muttered, her voice low. She raised her hand, and the city responded in kind. The core was now fully synchronized with Danny's biological signature, and the city's weaponry had become an extension of his will. He could feel it, a surge of power running through him, feeding into the weapons systems. It wasn't just the city's energy, it was his energy. He was the key to it all. Danny turned toward Enla, eyes locked with hers. "Let's end this." Together, they focused on the advancing Icthar forces. A final command was given, and the city's defense grid opened fire. But this time, it wasn't just the city fighting. It was Danny, too. Enla's eyes gleamed. "You've done it. You've made this your home." The final battle had begun, and with it, the beginning of a new dawn. The battle raged on, but there was a certain stillness within Danny now. The chaos, the destruction, the endless barrage of alien fire, it all seemed distant, almost muted as he stood at the heart of the city. His connection to the core was deeper now, sharper. He could feel the hum of the city, its pulse syncing with his own heartbeat. It was no longer just a weapon. It had become a part of him, and he, a part of it. The Icthar forces, despite their relentless assault, were faltering. The energy beams from the city's turrets tore through their ranks, leaving nothing but smoldering wreckage in their wake. The once feared invaders were now little more than prey, and the city had become the hunter. Enla moved beside him, her eyes scanning the battlefield with a quiet intensity. "They're retreating," she said, her voice a mix of relief and disbelief. "We've done it. They've broken." But Danny's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. The battle wasn't over yet. The last of the Icthar ships were making a retreat, but the scars of the conflict would remain. The damage to the city was minimal, but it was there, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. "I'm not done yet," Danny muttered, his hand still resting on the pulse rifle. He wasn't sure why he said it. Maybe it was the lingering adrenaline, the desire to keep pushing forward. Maybe it was the unspoken bond that had formed between him and the city. Whatever it was, he couldn't shake the feeling that the war wasn't truly over. Enla turned to him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You're more than just a soldier now, Danny. You're a protector. The city has chosen you. The core, it's alive inside you." He didn't know how to respond. The weight of her words settled on his shoulders, heavier than any armor. He wasn't just some guy fighting for survival anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that had the power to change the galaxy. And yet, as the city's systems powered down, returning to their dormant state, Danny felt a sudden sense of loss. He wasn't just connected to the city's weapons or its defenses. He had linked himself to its essence, to its very life force. That connection had come at a cost. "I can feel it," Danny said, his voice quieter now. "The drain, the city, it's taking more from me than I expected." Enla looked at him, her expression softening. "It's true. The core will drain you piece by piece. But you're not alone in this anymore. You're a part of this world now, Danny. And we will figure out a way to make this work." For the first time in a long while, Danny smiled. The weight didn't seem so heavy anymore. There was a future here, one that he could shape. And it wasn't just his life on the line anymore. He turned to face the city, the towering spires now quiet and still, the once raging hum of the core reduced to a peaceful murmur. Enla was right. He had become something more than human, something in between, a bridge between the past and the future. And the future, it seemed, had just begun. "Let's rebuild," Danny said, his voice steady, resolute. "Together." As the first rays of a new dawn broke across the horizon, the city stirred once more, its systems beginning to hum with life again. Danny could feel it, the energy, the power, but more than that he could feel the people, the ones he had fought for, the ones he had saved. The Ikthar had been beaten back, for now, but there was still much to do, much to learn. The galaxy was vast, and there were threats still out there, lurking in the dark corners of the universe. But Danny wasn't afraid anymore. With Enla at his side and the city as his ally, he had become something more than a soldier. He had become a protector, not just of this world, but of all worlds that lay beyond the stars. The story wasn't over. It had just begun. The end. For now.